Education is critical to every economy around the world, none more so than Nigeria. One of the biggest issues facing education in Africa's largest economy is funding it. Recently, there have been a couple solutions that have been put forward: student loans and raising taxes. Nigeria now has about 20 million out-of-school children, according to the latest global data on out-of-school children by UNESCO, the United Nations Educational, Scientific and Cultural Organization. Here is Nigeria's Vice President, Professor Yemi Osibanjo, on Nigeria's Sustainable Development Goals, where he emphasized healthcare and education.
The Office of the Senior Special Assistant to the President on SDGs, in close collaboration with relevant ministries, embarked on an independent evaluation of two priority SDGs, SDG 3 on quality health and well-being for all, and SDG 4 on qualitative and inclusive education and lifelong learning for all. Significantly, the report noted that education financing is much lower than in other African countries, and that transparency around education budgeting and spending needs to improve.
The Secretary General was very...
Matthias Schmali, United Nations Humanitarian Coordinator in Nigeria, has expressed his concerns about Nigeria's ability to fund education. He said, in relation to the SDG 4 on quality education, it is, for example, concerning to note that Nigeria is unlikely to achieve the global agenda for universal, inclusive, and equitable basic education for all school-age children by 2030 if the current very low public investment in the education sector remains the same. He also said in the 2022 budget, there was an increase to 7% on education, but the evaluation says it will need to increase to 20% with clear accountabilities on delivery. Nigeria's 2023 budget allocation for education is 1.79 trillion naira, 8.2% of the total budget, which is an improvement from 2022, but still under the 20% threshold advised by the United Nations. One of the solutions being put forward is coming from the presidential candidate of the All Progressive Congress, ASUU Bola Tinubu. He is suggesting student loans.
We will give you.
Back in 2015, while campaigning for Muhammadu Buhari, ASUU Bola Tinubu said the APC would provide student loans.
We will give you student loan. Our program, 4 years will be 4 years. You will not extend before 4 years to graduate in a university.
7 years later, in 2022, Festus Keyamo, Minister of State for Labor and Employment and also the spokesman for the Tinubu presidential campaign, said low revenue was the reason the promise wasn't kept, but the promise is still alive.
So there was a problem of revenue, but the dream remained alive. The dream to fulfill these promises are still alive today as we begin to ramp up our revenues.
The APC presidential candidate has repeated this campaign promise in 2022 and 2023, but is yet to speak to any local media to explain how student loans in Nigeria will be funded under his plan.
We will establish student loan. 4 years course, must be 4 years course. The variables, we take care of the variables. Interest rate, when does it start? When do you start to pay? When do you start to be employed? What aspect of it is to be written off during NYC? Or when does it? We answer those questions. They are questions, they have answers. Conceptually, the student loan, no one should be left behind. There will be student loan. If you cannot finance yourself, we give you a loan. You complete the education. When you get the work, only when you start working and with the capacity to pay, then you start to pay.
So the question is, are student loans in Nigeria viable? Well, we went looking for answers.
The student loan in Nigeria is really not viable. It's not implementable. I feel like putting the children in bondage. a country as rich as America introduced this bank loan, and somewhere along the line, because the students, those who pass through, are suffering in payment, the present president, who is a Democrat, decided to write off most of this loan, and is still doing so because it's having an adverse effect on the citizen. So if in a country like America, where people get job when you are through, you could have, if you don't have a job, you could have the country assist you, the loan did not work. Is it in Nigeria where you have 133 million Nigerians being under poverty line that the people go to take loan and pay, where unemployment is as high as 30-40%? Is that where they will pay?
The first thing a lender worries about is the source of repayment of the loan. You are lending students money to get an education without knowing whether they will get a job or what will happen or not. Therefore, I don't think lending money to students works anywhere. I mean, in the US, it's a problem. There's no point lending and giving debt forgiveness. I believe a much more viable option is to give scholarships and grants and bursaries so that education is a right. So free and compulsory and quality education is a right. And therefore, my view is that the monies that will be saved from subsidies should be deployed almost totally, fully towards funding education.
I have my significant doubts as to whether student loan will be a viable proposition in Nigeria as of today, essentially because of a number of factors. The first one is around data and identity management. So we don't have a unique way, even though we have the NIN, but it hasn't been well established and entrenched into the system such that it will be difficult for you to even track who got the loan, are they now employed, how much do they need to pay back. Also think about the fact that in terms of the science we're looking at, we have around 2 million undergraduates in all the Nigerian universities. As of today, about 300,000 postgraduate students. If you estimate that the amount of money they would need, you are easily talking about 1 trillion a year, at least for the first few years before students start hopefully repaying back. So that's going to be a big one, because if government could afford about 1 trillion, why have they not been funding the demands of ASUU?
Another solution that's being put forward is to raise taxes for education. And this is being preferred by the president of the Academic Staff Union of Universities. What he has suggested is to raise the education tax from 2.5% to 10%. Now, for context, the Finance Bill 2022 currently calls for that tax to be raised from 2.5% to 3%. We asked the president of ASUU why, and we also got reactions to his proposal.
Well, that idea actually came from me as a person. And my idea is this. As at present, in 1992, when we had an agreement with government, and government said there's no money to fund it, like they are saying now, they now challenge us to look for other means we can use to pay this, we can use to fund this your agreement. That was the origin of TED Fund. That was the idea is from ASUU. So this time around, the government also saying that there is no money to fund education. We can only give 5.9% budget to education. I guess 16%. The country will, and so all sort of thing. And we are suggesting, and they are not suggesting, we should not introduce tuition fee for the children of a man or a family that earn 30,000 a month, less than a bag of rice. How will these 130 million people be able to pay fee for their children and be in school? My own idea, instead of trying to tax these 133 million people who are already on that poverty line, why don't you take 10% of the profit of the big men? Just 10% of the profit, not the capital, of the big men, the big companies. Why not take 10%? Instead of punishing 133 million who are on that poverty, why not take 30% and inject into the education system, so that all the children can have access to good education, create jobs, and you have a better country, free country, a country where we will not need to spend so much of our resources on insecurity. So that is my idea.
I think, again, that's another knee-jerk reaction, with all due respect for ASUU. what has been done with the 2.5%? What have we achieved so far with the Education Tertiary Fund and all of that? We should now look at how effective our tax collection and utilization of tax proceeds has been in terms of its impact on the people.
Yeah, I completely disagree with ASUU on that proposal to increase tertiary education tax to 10%. I can tell you that as of today, we have it at 2.5%, and that was an increase just about 1 year ago. And based on the 2022 finance bill, there's already another proposal to make it 3%. For those of us who are involved in tax matter, I can tell you authoritatively that this education tax, 1 basis point of education tax rate is equivalent to 2 basis points of company's income tax rate, because it's calculated on a much larger base than the corporate income tax. So what that means effectively is that if you take the corporate income tax of 30%, take the tertiary education tax, multiply it by 2, that gives you 5%. You have NITDA, information technology tax, you have the police tax, you have the science and engineering tax. By the time you stack it all together, in addition to the 10% withholding tax that companies pay when they distribute their profits, you would easily find that the effective tax rate on corporates in Nigeria is well over 40%. This is one of the top 10 highest in the world. For a country where you need a lot of investments to attract, it's much higher than the average for even the OECD and for Africa. So the problem that we have with the educational sector is not to keep increasing the burden on the private sector to fund them. Fundamental question should be, over the past 10 years alone, education tax has contributed over 2 trillion naira to that sector. Who is explaining how that money has been spent?
So what about students? What do they think about taking loans to fund their studies and raising taxes to fund universities in Nigeria?
On the matter of student loan, I will not take at the moment.
Why not?
Because I can comfortably afford the fees at the moment. But if there's a situation whereby there's an increase over the years, I might be forced to.
For a start, I wouldn't take a loan because I don't need it, because it's being funded by my parents. But we have students that have difficult terrain on campus and all of that. So, and if I'm in that shoe, I don't think I would want to take a loan. I want to do something else, maybe borrow money from a friend and pay back, because we know that all these loan companies, they ask for too much. They will tell you a term and condition. At the end of the day, they will not abide by them. They will tarnish your image in society and send you messages, send your relative messages and all of that. So I wouldn't want to take a loan. I want to prefer another option.
I love what ASUU is doing. ASUU is a formidable prayer group on the government. If you look at our education system, most of the development we are seeing is because ASUU is not keeping quiet. But on the issue of increasing educational tax from 2.5% to 10%, I think they need to go back to the drawing board and put more pressure on government to see where there are possible leakages in the existing 2.5 tax, educational tax, and see whether it is even being judiciously used.
Nigeria urgently needs to attend to her education sector, and it is hoped that the conversations being held today can quickly become effective policies of tomorrow for the purpose of our youth. Rotus Oddiri, Arise News.